Welcome to today's call, everyone. My name is Stephen Miles from Addicus, and I will be the MC for our conversation for the next hour. First thing I'd like to do is introduce our speakers. First and foremost, myself and my business partner, Drew Adams from Addicus, will be speaking on a couple of topics. Jamie Pope, one of our senior advisors from Addicus, will be speaking as well. Chad Webb, our managing partner, has a deep background in banking. We'll be speaking on a couple of banking topics. Jesse Mitchell is an attorney, founding partner of the Mitchell firm, will be speaking as well. Brandon Dixon is the general counsel for Addicus, an attorney. He'll be speaking as well. Wes Hudson from the Otamanu Group is the founder and managing member. He has been an accounting partner of ours for a number of years. We'll be speaking on several tax issues. And finally, Michael Berry will be speaking from the MSF companies. I did want to mention there are a number of Addicus clients on the call. There are a number of MSF clients on the call, and there are others. For the people that are clients of Addicus and MSF, we have been working diligently for the past several months on a merger between the MSF companies and Addicus, and had been planning a very large rollout campaign April the 1st to announce all of this, but obviously world events have stepped in front of that. So we wanted to go ahead and bring everyone together on the call today and share and begin sharing our firm's mutual resources. We are going to make an announcement on April the 1st, but it'll be a much smaller announcement. And when this passes, we will come out with something larger. Our goal today is really to bring together information across a broad range of topics, either affected by the COVID virus or are in reaction to the virus, and we are going to need to move through these topics fairly quickly to cover them all. I apologize in advance to everyone because there are going to be topics that are very important to you that you're going to feel that we're moving very quickly past today, and you're going to want to know more. At Addicus, we've always prided ourselves on customized advice to our families and clients based on their specific situation, their specific needs, and we will be reaching out to everyone who is on this call to have those individual conversations, or if you didn't sign up for the call and you're just dialing in, feel free to reach out to us so that we can have conversations about these subjects that are very important to you in depth and come up with solutions that will work for you. This is not our normal way of communicating with our families, but we thought this was the best way to actually get a lot of information out to a lot of people and to begin to have those individual conversations. We have a couple of main objectives on this call. Number one, first, is to inform you of what's out there. The second is to really give you some peace and not panic that there's a way through this, and we stand ready to help. Finally, there are opportunities that will abound. Currently, you'll hear about some of those today, especially on the backside of this pandemic, that we would like for everyone to be prepared to take advantage of, and we will be discussing some of those later in our conversation. We are here in Oxford, Tupelo, Birmingham, Jackson, Newtown, Connecticut. We're open for business. We're ready to help now. We are having calls with our families and our clients daily, so we just want you all to know that we are here and ready to have conversations. There will be a question and answer period here at the end. We'd love for y'all to communicate any questions you have via either the go to webinar chat deal on the side. You can type it in there. Cami will be pulling those together. If any of you all are just on the phone and not online, feel free, if you have my cell phone number, Drew's, Michael's, anybody on this call, feel free to send us a text message. We'll pass that on to Cami and add it to the list. This call is scheduled for 1 hour, but we realize that we'll probably run over that. If people need to go to other things, we understand. Our question and answer period will probably run over, and we're all committed to staying late if we need to answer questions. So with that, we're going to move on to the first topic, which is really things we know. Brandon Dixon, our general counsel, will be speaking on the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the law that is already in place. We'll be talking about what's going on in the Senate here and a couple of other segments, and some tax filing deadlines that have changed. So with that, Brandon, I will hand it to you.
Thank you, Stephen. 3 acts, or actually 2 acts that were passed earlier last week are going to have a major impact on employers and employees throughout this crisis, and they represent a major change in the law. The first is the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. This expands benefits under the Family and Medical Leave Act to employers or employees of employers that have less than 500 employees. And under the Act, a employee qualifies for benefits if they have or are unable to work due to a need to care for a son or daughter who is under 18 years of age, and their child's school is closed, or they cannot get a provider, a child care provider. To be eligible, the employee has to have been an employee of the business for at least 30 days prior to the leave. If an employee is eligible, the first 10 days of leave are unpaid. After that first 10 days, then the employer is required to pay the employee. The amount the employee is required to be paid is 2/3 of their regular rate of pay determined under the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so in addition, there's a cap that applies at $200 per day and $10,000 in the aggregate. Certain employers are exempt from this new law, and the statutory exemption applies to 25 or employers with 25 or more employees or fewer employees if certain conditions are met. The Department of Labor also has authority to exempt additional employers with fewer than 50 employees. We look for regulations to come out from the Department of Labor. They have announced that they are going to be releasing those within the next couple of weeks. The other act is the Emergency Paid and Sick Leave Act. This is also a significant change in the law and requires employers to provide paid sick leave. This is in addition to any paid sick leave that they might provide on a regular basis under their standard policies. Unlike the Family Leave Act, employees do not have to have a 30 days of employment prior to being eligible for leave. So that is a significant difference. If an employee was employed yesterday and they come down with the virus, they could be eligible for sick leave that next day. To be eligible, there are one of 6 conditions that must be met. Either the employee is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine isolation order. 2, the employee has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, or they're experiencing COVID-19 symptoms. The other 3 categories apply if the employee is caring for a family member who is either under an order or has been advised to self-quarantine or is exhibiting symptoms. The last category is a category that allows the Secretary of Labor the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Secretary of Treasury to designate other circumstances where a individual might be eligible. If a employee is eligible for sick leave, then they are eligible for up to 80 hours of paid sick leave. The amount that they are required to be paid depends on the reason why they are eligible. If they are eligible because they are sick themselves, for instance, or they are under an isolation order, then they are required to be paid at their full rate of pay. Now, this applies as soon as they go on sick leave. There is no lag period as there is with, or unpaid period as there is with the Family Leave Act. And the cap in that case would be up to $511 per day and up to for a total of 10 days. If an employee is on sick leave because they're caring for a family member, for instance, then a lower cap applies. The cap is now $200 per day for a total of 10 days. And so there's a difference there in the caps that apply based on the reasons why the employer or why the employee is on leave. The sick leave, it is important to note that that is for a total of 80 hours. The paid family leave is for a total of 12 weeks or 10 weeks paid with 2 weeks unpaid. Because of the interaction, you could have a situation where an employee is eligible automatically for sick leave, and then when their eligibility for paid sick leave expires, they would be eligible for paid family leave. To fund this new mandate, Congress has also enacted new credits, payroll tax credits. These tax credits are refundable and would allow employers to basically recoup some of the costs of the paid family leave and paid sick leave that they pay. The credit is capped. It follows the caps that apply to the paid family leave and the paid sick leave. So if you pay, if you have a employee that's eligible for paid sick leave at a maximum rate of $511 per day, for instance, because they are quarantined, then the employer would be allowed a payroll tax credit against the employer's portion of the payroll taxes for that $511 per day. Now that is capped though at 10 days and at an aggregate of $10,000. In addition to the legislation that providing for paid family sick leave and paid family leave and paid sick leave, the IRS has also released administrative guidance that has extended deadlines for filing 2019 returns and paying taxes due that are due on otherwise due on April 15th of this year. Those taxes are income taxes and also estimated quarterly payments that would have been due on April 15th. So we're talking about your current year's quarterly estimated payments and then any payments that would have been due for your 2019 taxable year. The deadline is extended per the guidance from April 15th to July 15th. In Notice 2020-17, IRS extended the deadline for paying taxes. They followed that up with a notice on the following day, Notice 2020-18, which extended the deadline for filing the returns. It's important to note that the relief provided only applies to income taxes. It does not apply to employment taxes. At this point, we're going to go and I'm going to turn this over to Chad Webb, and he's going to talk about some of the banking and liquidity issues that have arisen.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate it very much. I am on slide 4 for the audience, and while we may not hit everything in the slide item by item, we did think that this would be a good time to really talk about some of the things going on in the banking industry, as well as talk about why we believe that banks are safe and why we believe that banks are going to have the liquidity that they need to serve all of their customers and take care of the markets the way that they should. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I do want to hit a few key points. And this really gets back to a bunch of questions that we've been receiving from our clients and just in the industry in general. And that question gets back to, how do we know my bank is safe? How do I know my bank is safe? While you may not have asked that question, I'm sure we've all thought that, right? So there's lots of things going on. Banks are dealing with ways to keep customers safe. There's so much out there in the market. Businesses are shutting down. How do we know there's not going to be a run on the banks? We all thought this in 2008. I'm sure we all thought about it. We saw it happen to a bunch of banks, and we saw a bunch of key banks get shut down. And so I'd encourage you to not let the stock price decline in value be an indicator as to the safety and soundness of banks. So what I would tell you is that banks are way stronger than they were before the Great Recession in 2008. A lot of this, was due to what many of us on this call would characterize as a knee-jerk reaction in 2008 and beyond from banks as they were being guided by their regulators to respond and prevent the Great Recession from happening again. And, there were many ways that they did that. And, while, again, some of that was knee-jerk reaction, we do feel like it has made the banking industry a lot stronger now. But there's some key learning points around that. And so what specifically does that mean for the banking industry now? And how do we know that banks are going to be liquid and be able to stay in business? And I'll tell you that, while you can read a million things out there in all the different ways, we believe it comes down to a few key things, right? The main kicker being the Federal Reserve, right? So the Federal Reserve has been involved in a lot. For one, as it goes back to what they've made banks do between the Great Recession and now, they went through and kicked through the Dodd-Frank Act, right? Now that included all sorts of stuff, many of which was not good for the banking industry, most of which was not good for businesses and the consumer. They forced some very intense capital planning policies and procedures and forced banks to do them. Stress testing, you've heard about that. They forced on all new capital requirements that were very, very hurtful to banks. Banks' income has gone down significantly because of the amount of capital they have to carry. Volcker Rule. Many of you have heard about the Volcker Rule that was put in after the Great Recession. That dealt with proprietary trading. So one of the questions we get a lot is, well, how do we know that our bank doesn't have stuff that's off balance sheet? How do we know they're not securitizing certain of their portfolios or getting in deals that could cause them outsized risk? Well, to be compliant with the Volcker Rule, if you're a bank of a certain size, over $50 billion in total assets, you have to be compliant, and that prevents all the proprietary trading and things like that. If you're a bank, you thought, well, that's not good for business, and it was really a pain. But now, in terms of us being the end user as consumers, I tell you, it makes us feel really good about the safety of the banks. In addition, the banks are way less leveraged than they were before the Great Recession. And so, this will be different, and there is going to be some significant government assistance, as you know, to the banking industry, but it is not a, quote, bailout. And it's going to be way different than TARP. Everybody remembers all of the market noise around the bank bailouts. Too big to fail. I'm sure every one of us have heard that. You're not going to hear much about that now. And there's not going to be a banking-specific bill or law that comes out that is really mainstream. And the reason why is the banks are doing, the Federal Reserve is doing a lot to make sure that the banks are going to be able to remain safe and continue to be, and this is most important, lending and taking care of their customers, right? So in addition to knowing that they're much stronger than they were, for the reasons that I mentioned, they're going to be able to do a lot of different things. And so I'd point you really to number 2 on this slide 4. It talks about unlimited liquidity. And I'm sure everybody reads that and thinks, no way. What does that mean? Wouldn't that be great? But it's really true. And the way that it works is what the Federal Reserve has told the banks is that while we're not going to be giving you loans, we're not going to be, giving you $3 billion of loans, regional bank A, for you to go do whatever you want to, right? We're going to do it a different way. And many of you saw what the Federal Reserve put out yesterday, where they said that they were going to be doing things like purchasing corporate bonds, opening up quantitative easing, which is where they were buying different agency bonds that were out there and really mortgage backs, and making sure that banks can get those off their balance sheets. And they put a new $800 billion number on that. They took the number off and said that they're going to continue buying as long as they need to. So that is a big deal for a lot of banks. In addition to that, they are doing some things that are very unprecedented, right? So think about how banks keep their liquidity, maintain their liquidity, and have additional access to liquidity. Well, banks, they've got cash in, they give loans. Well, when they give loans, they give the cash out. So as more stuff comes in and they've got business to do, where are they going to get the cash to do it? Well, they're going to be selling assets like we're going to be talking about for some of us, or they're going to be leveraging those assets. So again, in the unprecedented format that Federal Reserve has never done before, they have told the banks that they're going to be willing to do a number of different things. One is buying loan portfolios from banks. So to the extent banks need liquidity, they're going to be buying portfolios of loans from them if they need it. Specifically there, which is key.
Hey, Chad, this is Stephen. I'm sorry. We're in order to keep on time, I think we're going to have to hop on to the next subject. But I know that this has been a concern for people. And if anybody does have any questions about their specific bank, Chad has a long, deep history in the banking industry, and we're more than happy to help in that area. So
okay,
with that,
Jesse.
Yeah, sorry about that. Go ahead.
This is Jesse Mitchell with the Mitchell firm. What I want to discuss is business interruption insurance and how that is going to affect so many people in so many businesses, and how it's already started affecting businesses. When you think about business interruption insurance, the two things you need to think about. One is how to make the claim and how to present a proper claim, as well as the litigation that may likely follow, especially in this time with so many claims being presented. The insurance companies are already gearing up to deny a lot of claims. So it's imperative that you do two things. One, look at your specific policy. Over the past 6 days, we've reviewed over 52 policies, and there's a variation in these policies, and the language is what matters. So what triggers coverage in one policy may not trigger coverage in another policy. So have somebody look over your individual policy to know what are your triggers, and two, what are you writing up and what are you telling your employees, your partners, or anybody that you're talking to or send information out to as to why you're shutting down or suspending operations, because that's going to go hand in hand with the claim. If your claim is denied, then you want to make sure, and litigation is coming, which in all likely it's going to happen. We've seen it in Katrina. We saw it in BP, and we'll talk about some of the things that we saw come out of those events that we could likely see here. But you want to make sure that your policy is reviewed individually and that your claim is directly presented specifically to the policy you have. Let me give you one example of how that makes a difference. If you're stating that the reason you suspended operations or closed is it relating to the safety of your employees versus because you got a civil ordinance or a city ordinance or a governmental demand as to why you can no longer operate your business, or that the facility, in some instances, hospitals or clinics in which you operate have been demanded to close down if they're non-essential functions. So you want to make sure your claim is written up properly, so that gives you, your litigators, the tools that they need later on to successfully bring and prosecute your claims. If we move to the next slide, here's some of the things that we saw come out of Katrina in the BP oil spill. And Brandon kind of hit on some of these things, but SBA approved loans. There's a lot of discussion as to what's going to happen there. We think we're going to see some robust movement and some things that's going to really help small businesses there. You see the approval rates from Katrina and Hurricane Sandy, as well as the timing that took place, 7 to 12 weeks relating to those events. BP oil spill, unemployment assistance, extending those programs and assistance, as well as giving unemployment benefits to people who normally would not qualify for unemployment. Some are self-employed individuals. And then the Go Zone block funding and grants and the flexibility that they gave there. So those are some of the things that we can anticipate that may come out. But right now, one of the best things you can do for your business is look at your business interruption policy specifically and make sure that those claims are written up in a way where it's going to be harder to deny. But if there is a denial, your attorneys have the tools that they need to successfully litigate your case. And I'm going to pass it to Wes.
Thanks, Jesse, for that. Appreciate that. So one of the things we're seeing, I'm Wes Hudson with the Odomano Group. I'm a CPA, I've been focused primarily in tax mitigation practices. So what we're seeing now is there's some fairly creative tax laws that are looking to on the horizon. We're waiting for clearly phase 3 of coming in, and we think there's going to be some comprehensive tax law changes that will give us some liquidity in the markets. One of the things for sure, there's the recovery rebates for individuals that's going to be available for some of your employees that may be out there where they'll have some cash in their pocket. We heard about from Brandon the delays on the tax filings from April 15th to July 15th. It looks like we're going to have an extension potentially even to October 15th of some of that is what we're hearing on the street. One of the creative rules is this that could pass is this use of retirement funds where you're able to take an early withdrawal up to $100,000 of your retirement plan and use it for coronavirus related purposes. That's going to be repayable, it looks like, back over 3 years, which would be picking that income up over the 3-year period, not subject to the 10% prepayment penalty. One of the other big ones we're seeing on the horizon is the charitable contribution deduction. If it passes, there could be a complete elimination of the 50% limitation on adjusted gross income suspended for 2020. For those of you who may take advantage of some of the preservation techniques that are out there related to conservation easements, that could be a potential play if they allow for the non-cash portion of that, where that's not only a cash-only limitation. For corporations, that's subject to a 10% limitation currently, but they're looking at taking that up to 25%, which would be gigantic. One of the other things we're seeing for sure is the deferred payment of employer payroll taxes. That's rolling around the hill, where the employer portion only of Social Security is going to be delayed potentially over a 2-year period. So that not only impacts employers, but self-employed individuals who pay the 6.2% on their side of the employer piece of the FICA Social Security piece. That's payable in 2 years. It looks like where they're landing on that. And then, one of the things we're also hearing some really, really creative stuff coming out of Congress, which I think is fantastic, is the ability to have NOL carrybacks. NOL carrybacks were eliminated during the Trump tax law changes in 2017. And it looks like they may eliminate the 80% limitation and allow you to carry tax losses back from 2019 to 2018 as well, and carry back for 5 years. That's a significant change in strategy from Congress. And I think it's one because I think people will have some losses and be able to go back into prior years and get some recoverability of the tax refunds would be unbelievable there. The modification of the business interest, it looks like it's maybe changed from 30% to 50%, which is a big change. And then one of the things, I would just tell you a little bit about the what we're hearing on the depreciation, which could be big in the hospitality industry in particular, which would be hotels and restaurants. If you have improvements to facilities, the ability to be able to expense that 39-year asset up to 100%. We're not sure what year they're going to apply that to, whether that's going to be 2020 or go back to 2019. But for sure, if 2020 is available for us, that means that new hospitality could get a big boost on depreciation. One other key aspects I heard today coming from the Hill is potentially the path is the elimination of the passive activity loss limitations for individuals. And if that's the case, that could be a real game changer for many investors who've been limited on taking losses against ordinary income through the years through some active strategies. And so I would just tell you, we've got to see what happens in the next, I'm hoping in the next 12 hours. And then we see what the context of that looks like. But Brandon, do you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, just to add to what you said, Wes, it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose today. And really this past week, there's so much legislation and guidance that's coming out. I do want to reiterate that we are working diligently to stay on top of this and read the bills, make sure that we get accurate advice. And we will come out with a summary of the legislation as it moves through and progresses in Congress and is signed by the president. And we know more about it and then identify planning opportunities. One other thing I want to hit on, apart from the tax provisions, that I think is a really important piece to businesses and people on this call, is going to be the SBA loans and the funding that they are going to provide through the SBA. I encourage everyone to go out and apply for an SBA loan. And frankly, I'm doing it myself. I've encouraged my clients to do it. The money is there, and it is greatly expanded under the legislation that's proposed today. The legislation includes, importantly, a provision that will allow for forgiveness of certain SBA loans. Basically, the portion of the loans used for payroll, rent, or utilities, and certain interest expense. So if you go out, get a loan, you use it for your payroll, you use it for paying your rent, you use it for paying the mortgage, the interest on the mortgage or your utilities, that's going to free up cash for other investments or just saving. So I think that everybody should look into that. Importantly, this is available for self-employed individuals. So that is going to be, it's going to be a very flexible tool that's going to be administered by banks and not directly by the government. They're looking to get this money out quick. There's also one provision in there that would allow an immediate loan of up to $10,000 just to fund expenses in between the time the time it takes to get approved for the larger loan. So we're going to be looking into that piece. We're going to be paying attention to that, and we'll get more analysis and directions out to clients as we learn more in the process. But that is an important piece for everyone to consider. Jamie, I just want to get your insights, from a commercial real estate perspective and someone who's been involved in that sector.
Well, thank you, Brandon. And I will highlight one particular area that it should be so important to everyone on this call. If you own any commercial real estate, especially any properties you've purchased in the last 10 years, there is a high likelihood that you have items that we can go in and accelerate the depreciation on, take those, and now because of the net operating loss past and possibly the pass-through deductions that we can take, we can turn those into cash today. This is almost identical to our playbook that we used to help many people through 9, 10, and 11 recover from the 2008 crash. So anyone that's purchased any commercial real estate, especially in the last 10 years, there's a high likelihood you may have some substantial tax benefits turning into dollars today coming back to you. And I believe at this point, Brandon, I'll turn it back to you. I believe you have the next topic.
And Jamie, just before we do, I guess that also would apply to the passive activity loss limitations.
Absolutely.
Both the NOL carryback could apply and the passive activity loss limitation being potentially lifted, that could also be a benefit.
Yes, and if that is lifted, there's no question anyone who's bought commercial real estate probably in the last 15 years could have substantial tax benefits coming to them.
Hey, Drew, real quick, this is Wes again. I do think we need to make sure we add, so the website to get your SBA loan is www.disasterloan.sba.gov. And I will tell you, I've had many clients today talk about how slow it's been in responding, and in fact, I think at one point in time it shut down. So I would look and be pretty active on that, trying to get that loan in place.
Yeah, and we've actually got a site set up that the participants of this call will receive an email post this call, and we'll touch on this at the end, that will have links to sites just like that will have a lot of helpful resources on our site, a lot of these bills and things that we've reduced into very understandable bite-sized chunks.
Yeah, so now we're going to talk about sustaining the crisis and what can you do as a business to get through this. And this is going to really shift the conversation from, the things available to practical suggestions and ideas that we can implement right now and going forward, because that's really what we want to hear today. So I'm going to ask Chad to help us with this.
Sure. Thank you, Brandon. And look, I'm going to try my hardest to get through this, but, this is very important. And so I know Mr. Miles may be coming in with a hammer to drop me down to my knees again, but I'm going to try my hardest, Stephen, on this one. But, a couple things. One, I want to tell you, just in terms of background and setting the stage, it has long been our firm's bedrock principle to really make sure that everyone has an access to an abundant liquidity supply. For those of you that have been working with us for a while, you know that you've probably heard Stephen, Drew, me, or anybody on the phone talk about that. Excuse me. And you certainly heard those guys talk about it coming out of the Great Recession and how the people that were able to sustain that and use that in a way to come out on the other side and then really be very strategic and taking advantage of opportunities. Always we're very, very good and diligent in taking care of their cash, right? So you'll hear us say, conserve cash. Cash is your friend, right? And as we know, this current COVID-19 pandemic is really a change like no other. And no one knows for sure how it's going to affect us in the short, immediate, long term. But it will get over and get better in a period of time. But what we want to stress is to be able to make sure that we have the power and the ability to stay in the game and be able to play the next round. And specifically, we want to talk through this round, right? So the number one thing that we believe, and I'm sure everybody knows, it's going to assist all of us with that, is having, quote, dry powder. That dry powder can be what we believe to be either in the forms of cash or credit, right? So making sure that we've got access to liquidity. And when I jump into this section, I'll tell you that the overarching theme of this section is clearly around accessing and finding a way to access that, quote, dry powder to, one, try to endure this crisis and get through it and make sure that we have our businesses and our families in a spot to come out on the other side and be strategic. So we're going to go from talking about things that are more defensive posturing in nature to quickly pivoting to things that we would call more offensive posturing and making sure that we weaponize some of the things that we talk about to make sure that all of our clients and families can be very opportunistic for the silver linings that this market will provide us on the return. And so we'll talk about that after this piece. And so while some of the things in here are very sombering, I think they're realistic and we're all very aware. And so, first priority is to stay in the game. We know changes will continue to happen every day. And then again, second priority will be taking advantage of those opportunities, right? So we've got some things in here that are very high level, and then we've got some things in here that, may not be as relevant to the audience that we have on the phone today. We know that, but they might be relative to some of your employees or maybe some friends and family or otherwise as they get very tactical. And as Drew mentioned, and we'll talk about on the end, we are going to have a micro site that goes out that's got a host of different documents that we've put together from our firm, some of which will include a playbook. And, we've really stratified those in a way that they'd be helpful more for businesses, individuals, and some individuals that may be just family members for us, right? So with that being said, I'd ask that we just kind of jump right in to some of the things that are on slide 8, right? So at the top, you see position yourself and your business to, one, sustain the crisis and then take maximum advantage of the recovery and opportunities. So we believe that while those seem to be binary, certainly in presentation, we believe that the proper planning can allow those to be one and the same. So if we plan the right way, we will not only sustain the crisis, but we will come out in a way to really start playing offense. And so I think as we go through these matters, we'll spend a little bit more time on these because this is a section that I've thought is, what does this mean to me? So if I'm in the audience, tell me what it means to me. What are some things I can do? And so we would call this more of our playbook for business owners and individuals. In the spirit of making sure we have enough time, I'd tell you that under number 2, advice, really sections A, B, C, and D, we could really talk about all at one time, right? So under A, open or draw current available lines of credit. Very self-explanatory, right? So number 1, you can either establish or set up new business lines of credit, personal lines of credit. Those are normally unsecured in nature. Obviously, you can always take advantage of home equity lines of credit in current interest rate environment that's out there. You could certainly expand some of those. If you have existing lines of credit, you may want to consider drawing some of those lines down and putting the cash away, right? You can do this whether through FDIC insured, invested in treasuries, an account that's, quote, held away with some sort of brokerage firm. Additionally, for those of you with significant securities portfolios with your personal security advisors, it's very easy to set up securities lending or securities-backed line of credit. Applying for working capital loans, many of you small business owners know what that is. Generally, they are asset-backed deals where you can go and secure operating or working capital loans for the business. Brandon mentioned earlier there are going to be a multitude and just a significant number of opportunities to take advantage of from Small Business Administration. One of which that you've all probably read about is the disaster assistance that they're applying for working capital for affected businesses, right? And so on those, we know that they're going to be able to have loans that go up to $2 million, and they're going to be what we understand at 3.75%. Here's the kicker, and here's why this one's different. They're going to allow some of these to be paid back over terms of up to 30 years, right? And there's a whole number of different things. We don't have time to go through all of them at this call, but the SBA has been given the go-ahead to be very, very customer-friendly, and that's going to be a big deal. We all know that those are administratively taxing and burdensome and require, an act of God, so to speak, to get through that. We do believe that we can get there. We have tremendous contacts in terms of how to navigate that process, and we do believe it's a good deal. And even if you think about what...
Just to piggyback on that, I think it's important to add that the program is going to be administered through banks. And so the new legislation would make the banks the gateway, and they would relieve a lot of the regulatory burdens for them to request administrative authority. So that will help.
Yep. So anyway, lots to do there. SBA, we're going to provide you with a bunch of stuff there, but that's going to be a big deal. Tapping unused equity, you're certainly familiar with that. Forbearance on...
Hey, Chad, I just want to just quickly step in on that. With respect to the unused equity on assets, one of the things that we've talked about internally is that there's really no better time than right now. If you're going to do that, you're thinking about that, you probably ought to go ahead and do it. Market valuations are at all-time highs. Certainly this virus pandemic will have some effect on that. So we could see a lot of equity vanish from people's balance sheets in terms of asset value. So if you're going to do that, this is the time to do it.
Right. And in the interest of time, I would tell you that, really the rest of the things on this uh, slide on slide 8 are very self-explanatory. We can certainly talk about those in greater detail later. But Cammy, let's go ahead and skip to slide 9 quickly if we could. Okay. And these are just other certain playbook type matters. Obviously, folks know that we believe it's important to renegotiate contracts and leases, both if you are the recipient, lessor, lessee. It doesn't matter what position you're in. We feel like those are very important, and need to be prepared for what could happen on both sides of that. Business interruption insurance we talked about, delay filing and payment of taxes. We're going to hit that a little bit more, and Brandon talked about that, as well as the medical leave piece. E is something that's very important, and I'll tell you this, we can send you more on it later, but quickly, that's important for you and your business to try to find ways to track anything related to COVID-19. So in addition to your direct expenses and things that you've done and had to pay for, think about any of your indirect time. If you've been hosting staff meetings, having calls with your advisors, talking to the schools, local community leaders, whoever it may be, come up with a rate per hour for people and be holding that off to the side. We feel like that there's going to be a whole lot more to come on that, and we would encourage you to either create a separate GL line item with some subcategories, whatever you need to do, but be very focused on that. And there's a number of different reasons. You can look at our paper for that. Squeezing the balance sheet, clearly obvious, and same with the rest. And so with that, Brandon, I'd ask you to just jump into
before you do, just real quickly, I want to make a couple of comments. I don't think we can impress enough that this is probably this and the opportunistic portions of this crisis, which we will see, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. Using your balance sheet to your full advantage and to some degree swelling your balance sheet during this time, we think makes sense. The businesses that we saw really impacted, and in some cases go out of business in 2008, did not go out of business because they weren't good businesses or anything like that. They went out of business because they didn't have enough cash to sustain the crisis. So I would tell you, even if you're in great financial shape, you should be looking at this opportunistically, building cash, stockpiling cash. We don't know what's to come. We think this will subside quickly, but we don't know. And if it does subside quickly, there's going to be a lot of opportunities that will present themselves, and we've already seen a lot of that. Brandon, with that,
cash is king. Cash is your friend, and don't be afraid to have too much of it. Even if you access some of these lending facilities that are out there, if you don't need them, you can always pay them back. And I would tell you that any fees associated with securing the funding is well worth the security that it can provide to you and your business. Brandon?
Yeah. And so now I want to go from, you're right, cash is king. What happens if you don't have that cash? And what happens if you have to make critical decisions, which, we know that you're doing right now? First, it runs a spectrum. There is no one, there's no piece of advice that fits every situation. It's very unique. But, there are some common questions that people are asking. And in these points, A through E, it really reflects what we've been hearing from the past, week or so from clients and others. So we just want to go over that. First off, can employers mandate that employees telework or work from home? Yes, they can do that. You have to be mindful that if you're going to do that, set policies and understand how that's going to apply. Understand also that the rules of the workplace will generally apply if the employee is working from home. So you need to make sure that you really understand the ramifications of what you're asking them to do. Just because they're sitting on their couch doesn't mean that they're not entitled to workers' compensation, for instance, if they get injured. And a lot of people don't think about that. Second, must employers pay non-exempt employees if they voluntarily close? One of the things that employers are considering is
do I temporarily shut down for a while? Do I just, is it better for me to do that? And then how do I take care of my employees? And, I want to reiterate that almost every business person I've talked to, when they ask this question about shutting down, their concern is about how they take care of their employees. They want to do right by them. And so, at the same time, they're also concerned about, look, they're running a business, they're shouldering these costs too. So how do you balance that? Well, for one, if they're a non-exempt employee, meaning that they're an hourly employee, then as long as that employee doesn't have a contract, as long as they're not a unionized, part of a unionized shop, then generally they are an employee at will. And as long as they do not work, you do not have to pay them. So if they do not come in for a day of work, then they're not entitled to a day of pay. It is a good business practice to, give some notice ahead of time. And I recommend that you do that to the extent possible. It may be a good business practice for you to give some sort of severance, but unless you're contractually obligated to do that, you have no legal obligation to do that and to pay that. Now, you do need to take into account, though, that if you're not going to do a layoff across the board, other laws can be implicated. For instance, age discrimination laws. So you don't want to you need to be concerned about how you're implementing your policies in these respects. The other question is, what about exempt employees? And exempt employees, I'm talking about salary employees. Well, the rules are a little bit different for them. So if they work one day during the week, then they're entitled to a week's worth of pay. So if you're going to do a temporary layoff, then generally what you see, or a furlough, you'll see that exempt employees are furloughed from week to week, and that's the reason for that. Now, what happens if you do decide to do this? And when does temporary turn into a permanent situation? Or when would, for instance, employees be entitled to unemployment benefits? And that question really varies from state to state. The states are being very proactive right now in enacting legislation. I can tell you that that bills have been proposed in the last I saw in 18 states to address unemployment benefits. One of the reasons for that is that a provision in the Families First or Coronavirus Response Act, which was passed last week, encourages states to pass certain measures expanding employment benefits in order to receive federal funding. So we're going to see a lot more of that. We're also going to see them address this particular issue. So that's something to look for and to address. Just understand that there could be a period that your employee, if it goes past generally 3 or 4 months, in some states 6 months, then your employee may be considered unemployed at that point and not have a responsibility to be looking for employment or maybe eligible for benefits. With that said, I'm going to turn this back over to Michael and Drew to wrap this up and really give us some perspective overall.
Yeah, that's all right. Actually, it was Stephen, but appreciate that, everybody. No problem. We're going to talk a little bit about the silver linings here. We're going to run a couple of minutes over. It looks like I ask everybody to hang on. We'd love to keep y'all for the last few minutes here for the Q&A. But ultimately, we believe there are a lot of silver linings that are going to come out of this. There are going to be assets that you're going to be able to pick up on sale. They're going to be lending opportunities, and I told somebody several days ago, money is going to be about free. That's not going to make a good business deal bad, but it's certainly going to make some interesting opportunities out there to invest in companies. So I'm going to turn this over to Mike Berry and let him go through several things that we think are silver linings, some things we've actually already seen and taken advantage of in the last 5 or 6 business days. Go ahead, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you to all the participants on the call today. I guess they saved the best for last, right? So I'm going to give everybody on this call some actionable items to think about and take back to your board of advisors. Just a quick few remarks. I suspect many of the listeners are taking some notes. I just want to remind everybody that there's going to be handouts available electronically on our website and all of our apps. But if you prefer, just reach out to me and I will personally email you PDFs, formats of everything if that's the way you prefer. The last thing I'll say before I get into some of the silver linings is many of you already know we serve physicians in the healthcare sector. We're going to be setting up some chat rooms by specialty where we can all idea share and discuss some relevant subject matter. We're all in this together, and by no means do we have a monopoly on any good ideas. So let me just get right into some things that you can take back to your board immediately. So first, as you've heard consistently throughout this theme, is that it's an ideal time to consider refinancing existing debt and try to lock in those rates for as long as possible. So if you need access to liquidity, or you want to reserve some cash to jump on some new opportunities, here are some ideas, okay? We already heard about taking on the SBA or other program relief loans that are out there during this crisis. I want to make a very important note to that. Our office will help every single one who wants to apply for these loans. Well, first, let's identify the ones that you most qualify for based on your fact pattern. Secondly, we will absolutely help walk everybody through the application process and see it entirely through. So I'm getting a lot of conversations with our business owners that they feel very lost and they don't really know what to do next. We will absolutely be a shining light on that for you. Next I have here is refinancing interfamily loans. Take advantage of low AFR. AFR meaning applicable federal rates that are published by the government. Also, we have refinance notes from trusts. Take advantage of low AFR again. We also want to take a look at asset-backed lending opportunities such as premium financing. So for those who don't understand premium financing, it's where we can use the correct amount of leverage to purchase an appreciating asset. And while we're also on the subject of insurance, many of us on the call have some cash value or permanent insurance-like policies. This may be a very inexpensive way to grab some cash and liquidity immediately. That envelope is always open, which means you can put the money back at any time and borrow it out. It's very handy in times like this. Also, we have here revisiting margin accounts on some of those marketable securities. Go back to your portfolio managers and advisors and find out what's available to you. Another good source of liquidity right now. And for our healthcare professionals, you know, there are ways that we can get lines of credit right now against equipment. We can also consider selling your receivables. Raising some cash today can be purchased at a very, very low rate. So that's those are some ideas there on refinancing and cash out opportunities. The second we have here is market investment opportunities. So let me get right into that. I encourage everybody to go back and meet with your portfolio advisors. Retest your risk. Times like this, we find that it's more painful to lose value than it is exciting to gain in value. And the answers you probably provided to those portfolio managers may be different now than they were 30 days ago. So when speaking with these portfolio managers, ask these questions. What are the ways in which we are addressing risk? And I'm going to give them to you. The 3 ways to address risk are we can avoid risk, we can manage our way through it, or we can transfer risk. Make sure that you got the proper amount of each. Next I have here is rebalancing your portfolio and take advantage of the current market opportunities. It may seem awkward where an advisor may say, hey, let's put more money into equities right now. But long term, if you have a disciplined approach, it may be the best thing for you. I have here on my list Roth IRA conversions. This is a very hot topic right now. Roth IRA conversions are where we take traditional IRAs or retirement monies and we convert them to Roths. Because of the depressed values in the market space right now, there will be less of a tax impact on that conversion. So have your advisors run a simulation, run an analysis to see what the benefit might be to you 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years out from now. Tax loss harvesting is another one. So tax loss harvesting is where clients can sell assets at a loss and simultaneously purchase a similar asset. This allows all of us to remain active in the market, but lock in some of those tax credits and can be carried forward throughout the next several years. Next I have on my list here is everyone should be reviewing their life insurance products right now. This is very important, very, very important. Traditional portfolio-based assets and insurance carriers are going to be under additional stress because of the anemic fixed income markets and now depressed marketable securities. It's highly unlikely that the original projections are underperforming. Corrective measures can be taken on those products right now, but you need to address it. And for those who own indexing vehicles, please make sure you review and make appropriate adjustments to those index segments. It may be a very good time to add additional monies to segments that are pegged to the S&P and other indices, again, because of the lower market values right now. I want to address qualified retirement plans. Very, very hot topic right now. For those who have defined benefit commitments, defined benefit plans, because if you have lower values right now, there's an opportunity to contribute additional tax-deductible monies to these plans. So those of you who have the resources to do so, again, a good opportunity to put monies into those. Many of you are also asking us about relief for these plans, right? So there's a commitment involved. Well, defined benefit plans can be frozen with minimal contribution requirements, a very good source to free up some cash flow. Now, it probably can't be done for 2019's contributions, but can be looking forward 2020 and beyond. Good time to review and plan accordingly. Other qualified plans such as 401ks, IRAs, consider funding these plans now instead of waiting to maybe September or October to fund these plans. Again, take advantage of some of the depressed market values. So the next section is really all about private equity. So private capital markets are investing in small to medium-sized businesses and real estate have just been voracious up until the recent events. There's going to be companies out there who are not well positioned to sustain the short-term crunch, and it's going to create opportunity. I recommend that everybody review any of the private equity deals that they are currently invested in, see if there's any outstanding capital calls, determine how the current market circumstances are going to affect these deals currently and into the future. There may be an ability to renegotiate with the sponsor for more favorable terms. So some ideas here. For deals in progress, renegotiate contracts and construction bids. Revisit the current deal terms based on current market environment. And seek opportunities to diversify from your current marketable investments. I'm going to give you an example to illustrate what I'm describing. Recently, we were just about to close on a piece of land to facilitate a large self-storage development. We had the land under contract for $4.5 million, and as a direct result of the crisis, we renegotiated the land purchase to $3 million. The result is that of the renegotiation is that we improve the projected internal rate of return for all the investors. So the fourth section that we can talk about here is income tax planning.
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to, I think we're going to have to cut it short here a little bit because we're running out of time. But there are several things we need to do around tax, income tax planning, estate planning. Those are huge topics. But I know we've run past time, and I want to make sure to get to a few questions. So I appreciate it.
I'm great with that. No problem.
couple of quick things, and then I do want to move to the questions that Cammie has been putting together. Number one is, again, we're open for business here. You know, we're working with our family office and our private client folks. We're more than happy to do some consulting. We've done that historically around tax structuring and opportunity zone planning and special projects. Well, our new one is COVID-19 crisis planning. So we're doing a fair amount of that. Contact us directly to request a call or meeting. We will be following up with everyone who signed up for this call. I want to thank all of our panelists, especially Jamie Pope and Jesse Mitchell and Wes Hudson, who are our outside advisors. We try to work with the best, and we're really glad to have you guys involved. So with that, Cammie, would you like to let us know of some questions we have? One last thing, we've talked about this microsite. Y'all will all be getting it. All the documents that we've talked about, everything we've been talking about here is in long form. We're going to send it to you, number one. And number two, we're constantly updating things. As soon as this bill becomes a law, there are things in here that will affect every single subject we've touched on. And we will be adding to that, again, how you can help your employees, types of loans you can get for your business, how it's going to affect real estate transactions and other things you've done in the past. So with that, Cammie, what's our first question?
Okay, thanks. We've got several questions that have come in from the audience. So everyone who's listening, we will try to get through these. The first question for Drew Adams. Liquidity is my main concern. Should I be planning for 6 months or 18? What is the best approach?
Thank you, Cammie. I guess I would say the starting point, I don't think anybody really knows. I think our firm view is we don't believe it will last anywhere near 18 months. I certainly hope it will not. But we don't know. And so as a result of not knowing and that uncertainty, I think it goes back to what we talked about. The liquidity is king, having cash on hand and available cash to draw from. And so I would go back and reiterate what we said earlier. I would draw as much cash as you possibly can. One point I know we wanted to make earlier and we didn't is that when you draw out a loan and you take the cash into your balance sheet, yes, you've increased your liabilities, but you've also increased your assets at the very same time. So your balance sheet effect is completely neutral at that point. So really the only thing that may do to your balance sheet is you may have some costs associated with those loans. I would tell you there'll be plenty of time to think about all that. Right now, it's about sustainability and positioning yourself best for opportunity. So I wish I could answer the question of exactly how long it's going to be. I don't think anybody can answer that. I would plan for it to be an extended duration, and we all, are hopefully optimistic that it won't be. And when the crisis clears, we'll be in great position to take advantage of some great opportunities. And if it makes sense, we can just pay the loans back, and we're out a little bit of costs. I would look at those costs as an insurance premium.
Okay. I have a question here. Stephen, I want you to determine who best to answer this. What are the most important things you feel retirees should know from everything that you've learned so far so they can take full advantage of the financial relief that's already been passed or anticipated to be passed by Congress, specific to their needs?
Wow, who should take that? That's a great question. I'll take a stab at that. When people are retired, it's a totally different situation than somebody who's operating their business. They lose a lot of control a lot of times because their assets are now tied up in investment accounts and other things that they have very little control of what happens with those assets. What I would say is this: for people who are retired, it is time to sit down and do what Mike Berry said earlier. It's time to reassess cash flow needs. It's time to reassess what is your actual risk tolerance. It's time to assess what kind of assets do you own. And so what I would say is that the best resource is to find somebody to sit down and do the planning around those assets so that you can say, how can I be sustained in the long run? One of the techniques that we've used for a long time is really to help people build two buckets of wealth when they retire. One bucket is really for cash flow and sustainability. It's low volatility. I think we had a client who looked at theirs in the last few days and they said, my lifestyle bucket, as we call it, was down like 8%. Well, it's a much more conservative asset and that was all the money they needed for him and his wife to be around till about age 95. They had a whole nother bucket of assets that they put together. It was much more aggressive, and that was really for the next generation. And if they needed some of that extra money, it was there as well. And that money was actually obviously down a lot more because it was much more aggressively invested. So I hope that answers somebody's question, but it's really take stock of the current scenario, take stock of what you need, and make adjustments accordingly. I don't know of any government programs for retirees right now. I don't know that any of that is discussed in this bill, other than, again, if you own more sophisticated assets, there's probably some planning relief there. So go ahead, Cami.
The only thing I'll mention too, this is Drew, is that it may, going back to somebody who's even retired, who may not think they're in a position to borrow. You may very well be. It may make more sense now to live off borrowed cash that is, flatlined in terms of value versus drawing from your equities and things that are depressed. Give those things a little time to come back. Buy yourself some time. Maybe borrow against your portfolio rather than taking distributions. Maybe take from the cash portions of your portfolio and let that replenish as dividends and things come in. Maybe take from the fixed income portions. Try and take assets from where you're not taking them from depressed values.
Okay.
Cami, do we have any questions around employees at all and people with employees in their businesses?
Yes. I think maybe these are for Brandon, or you guys let me know. Will payroll forgiveness cover commissions and bonuses? Also, is there a salary maximum that is covered?
Yeah, so payroll, and to be clear, there is not a payroll forgiveness per se, but the payroll provisions, the family leave provisions, the sick pay provisions, and also the payroll tax provisions, they cover all types of remuneration and that you may pay. So if you are a commission employee, and the distinction is important if you're an employee versus self-employed. If you're an employee, then you could be eligible even if you make commissions for the relief provided. If you're a self-employed individual, then you're going to be eligible for relief, but that relief will be provided through income tax credits that you'll take against your self-employment tax.
He specifically added a comment now. He's talking about the CARES Act specifically.
Yeah, so the CARES Act is going to be very similar with Brandon,
yes. This is Chad. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think and I can't see the question, Cami, but I think what he's saying is that to the extent that they are able to secure some assistance, right, for a small business, is there any limitation related to executive comp? And there has been some stuff out there that says, similar to what TARP did for banks a while back, that they want to know why, or not why, but in the event that they are able to secure some funding from SBA or whatever, are they going to have to apply to these executive comp rules that are out there, meaning no executive can make more than $425,000 all year, in a year during the period of time that they are under such SBA loan agreement. Sure. I think that may be what the person. Kimmy, is that
point
fair?
To this point, I've not seen any limitations so far. Now, what I can tell you is that the eligibility and the loan programs are based on, for instance, your payroll, your utilities, your interest payments, your mortgage payments, and they look at, in underwriting, they're going to look at those expenses, and you're allowed basically a loan that will fund up to 3 months currently of those expenses. So it takes into account all of your payroll, and in that payroll, it's the statutory language is very broad, and it says payroll. Now, regulations might come out, Chad, to your point, that could further limit that. But right now, it appears that all compensation that was paid as of March 15th would be allowed in determining that calculation and in underwriting loans.
Yep. Well, to the audience member that asked that, there is some stuff out there that they're applying consideration to the $425,000 maximum compensation in salary for executive officers. But, there's all sorts of ways to deal with that because many of you who are in that position own your companies, and there are various structures, as you know, where they can be set up for distributions and other things that don't qualify for salary. So if audience member,
Okay.
whoever you are, we would love the opportunity to talk to you about that.
Excellent. He says the question was answered. Thank you so much. Next question, possibly for Brandon, unless Stephen or someone has another suggestion. Is there any recommendations or concerns on laying off specific employees? For example, the higher paid employees only.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Sure. Yeah. Now, there are discrimination rules that apply. You need to be aware that when you're laying off higher paid employees, those are generally going to be your exempt employees. So if in that case, they're likely going to be covered by an employment agreement. That is the first thing to do when you're making that consideration. Look at that employment agreement and see what rules apply, what you've agreed to. Look at your own employment policies. If nothing prohibits you from laying them off, then that's perfectly permissible. But you have to understand that discrimination rules can apply. So you need to make sure that you're not discriminating on the age or on the basis of age, for example, or that it couldn't be viewed as a form of discrimination because of they may be part of a protected group. If that's not the case, then you can lay off, or you could cut salaries even for a specific group of employees.
And I think that's an important point, Brandon. We are seeing all kind of creativity here, Mike. I know that you've had conversation with folks where people are doing things in stages and reducing salaries over time, and just because to us there's strategic decisions involved here. There are people with employees, and we are business owners ourselves. We have employees. Again, we're not in an industry that's been devastated like some, but people are going to want these employees around when their business comes back. And it's how do you keep the people that are important to you and you want to keep without discriminating, like Brandon said. So again, there's some strategic conversations along with the financial concerns. So what's the next question, Kimmy?
If we have adequate cash on hand to operate for 60 days, do I need to preemptively draw my business lines of credit, or should I wait until I actually need it?
Drew, I'm going to toss this one to you.
All right. Well, I'm going to give a bit of a lawyer answer, and that is that it depends. I would tell you there are a lot of people who are drawing those lines of credit. I think GM has made a very large multi-billion-dollar draw on their lines of credit, and many companies have done that. I would tell you that if you are concerned about lines of credit being potentially reduced or taken away from you by the bank, we haven't seen any of that, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. One thing that's very important to do is if you are going to draw on that line of credit, make sure and move the cash to a different bank, simply because there are typically set-off provisions in your loan agreements that would basically make that a null and void transaction. You draw the money down and effectively suck it out of your account. So if you are going to draw it, the only reason I would do that is if you're thinking that line of credit would go away. What you may want to consider is opening up new lines of credit, potentially asking for expansions of existing lines of credit, or potentially tapping equity in other assets that may be currently untapped.
Okay, excellent. Question for Brandon. Can you go to a 75% work schedule with exempt employees?
Yes, you can. That is permissible. Now, you have to understand, though, that with exempt employees, if they work 1 day a week or even 1 hour of a week, then they are entitled to their full salary for that week. So you would have to, in effect, you would have to work out that schedule so that you vary. That what's been done in most cases is that 3 weeks on, 1 week off in that case, and a work sharing type arrangement
where
Brandon, couldn't you also though amend salaries for this? Assuming you're not under employment agreements that say otherwise, couldn't you also amend salaries to 2/3 salary or whatever to address that?
Yeah, you could get an employee to address that. Now, what you can't do is say that, look, the only way that we can keep you around is to pay you this, pay you a lower amount. You can do that across the board, but you can't do that for a specific employee. It has to be across the board. But yes, if you do that categorically, it would be permissible.
And there are a lot of other ways that these things all intertwine. You know, this SBA lending, which does have forgiveness in it, at least in the current bill text that we're reading. You could use that to help fund severance. They're increasing unemployment assistance, so you could you could lay employees off, give them some severance to help get them through. Instead of being limited to $250 a day, they're going to get more like, or $250 a week, excuse me. They're going to get closer to $850 a week. So you can tie a lot of these things together to help get your employees through and keep the business intact.
Yeah, and given the tax credits and given other incentives, it might be better in a circumstance like that to look at using paid time off or encouraging paid time off, leave, or other options, in maybe a mixture.
Okay. I've got a two-part question for Drew Adams. Can you comment on how to get a small business loan and who's eligible for same through the SBA? Are there other avenues to secure low-interest capital other than private banking?
So as far as who's eligible, any businesses that were in existence basically when this all began or at the beginning of the year are eligible, other than if they're over 500 employees or there's some industry-specific specifications that if you have more than 500 employees, it doesn't mean you don't qualify, but you would need to look at that and we can help you through that. So I would tell you most everybody qualifies for this. And I think the SBA lending route, because of the forgiveness that's attached to that, again, we don't have final bill text, so we're speculating to some degree. However, we believe that this bill is going to pass in its current form or very close to its current form. This SBA lending will be one of your primary and best sources for lending because there are loan forgiveness provisions associated with it. It basically works like the following. They're going to make your loan amount 3 months of your payroll, your rent, and it doesn't work exactly like what I'm saying, but 3 months of your payroll, your rent, your utility bills, your interest payments, and so on and so forth. And those things are also slated in the current bill to be forgiven. So effectively that loan means it really becomes more of a grant over time. So I think that's going to be your first and best avenue for lending. It will be, I do not expect that process to be easy, no matter how much they've cut the red tape, simply because of the sheer volume that's going to be going through the system. I think it's going to be problematic, but we know how to help navigate that. And that's really going to be your best and first source. I think your secondary sources are banks. There will be private lenders and things out there that will help in addition. We talked a little bit about, or have on the PowerPoint and having some of our materials, some mezzanine debt, private equity type lending. That is not going to be your best and most attractive source for liquidity.
Okay. Stephen Miles, question came in from one of our clients. What are opportunities if you have available cash? Hard money loans opportunities to good credit companies, and how do I get deal flow? That's
a great question. I was having a conversation with some bankers in the last couple of days, and it's always, I always say it never catch a falling knife, and it seems like we're trying to catch a little bit of falling knife here. I'll say a couple things. I think you're going to be able to pick up some assets for pennies on the dollar in the next several months, just because there are people, and we all know them, who make good money, leverage themselves to the hilt, and don't have the cash to sustain themselves through this. And there are going to be some assets from lightly used Porsches to really nice apartment complexes that you'll probably be able to pick up very attractively. So number one, those are going to be out there. We are constantly looking for them. We have a network of people. We are constantly looking for those types of deals, and my phone rings every day on those things. So we try to vet those for people. And I would say this to you all: if people are going to bring hard money lending deals to y'all, definitely. They're going to be people, I mean, it's already coming out of the woodwork. Some, hey, can I get some cash to sustain me? Because they're not on calls like this and understand there's other loans, other things out there. That's one of the things that we do. Drew and I were on a call earlier today, vetting a hard money lending deal where somebody's trying to get, masks from China and cover the cost of getting it from here to there. So I would say, A, keep your eyes open. B, we'll keep our eyes open. And C, be patient. Again, there's some deals right now, but I think the deals are going to get better. The thing that happened with the land where we got it for $1.5 million cheaper, the one thing that Mike didn't say, we didn't even ask them. They told us, we'll cut it $1.5 million if you'll close in 2 weeks. Okay. I think you're going to see some things like that fall in your lap, and we'll be happy to help you vet those. Hope that answers the question.
And I just want to touch on one additional thing. I think, I was talking with a client earlier today, and they were looking at a particular opportunity that, was a kind of a lending type program. And they were saying, they were going to pay me 10%. Well, 10% was probably the going rate for something like that 30 or 45 days ago. That's no longer the going rate. So, as Stephen said, be patient, take your time. Don't jump on the first deal that sounds sexy. What was sexy 30 or 45 days ago no longer is. And you need to command higher rates and higher returns for the risk you're taking.
Okay. One of our good friends of the firm just sent in a question. Are the SBA loans available for service companies as well as highly capitalized companies?
Brandon, you want to speak to that?
Yes, they appear to be. They appear to be available for almost any business. And I go back to take myself. I have a law firm. I am employed by my firm, which is actually an S corporation. But I'm going to apply for an SBA loan, and the reason is it's out there. It's available cash, and it does apply to self-employed individuals and smaller businesses, service businesses in particular. So they're really trying to get cash out there. I encourage you to apply for that.
All right.
Hey, Brandon, this is Kimmy. Hold on, this is Chad. I want to jump in real quick on that. Yeah, we do encourage you to apply for it, and we believe that it will be a great thing for your business. And like Drew mentioned earlier before, worst case scenario is you don't need it, and it was just like paying a premium on your insurance. What I will tell you, though, is, there is going to be some market noise around people with more, quote, means than others, which most of our clients and most of the people on this phone do. And so we do want to make sure that, in terms of advice from Addicus, that we're making sure that we are being mindful of that, and we're using it for business purposes. And so we can help you with all that. Everybody knows that navigating SBA anything is tremendously burdensome, taxing, and the devil's in the details in terms of how you submit it, when you submit it, who you submit it to. And we could have hours of conversation in terms of how to navigate that. So please follow up with us on that.
Okay. One of our clients emailed this question in advance. What do I do about paying my employees? Do I designate it as paid sick leave, or what? Should I lay them off so they can get disability insurance? Two-part question.
I'll take that one. So firstly, in order to pay them as sick leave, they actually have to qualify for the sick leave, which Brandon went through earlier, and there will be a document on our microsite that goes through that in a very clear fashion. And I will say it's very clear, but it's still confusing because the law is somewhat confusing, because you can actually be under family leave and sick leave potentially at the same time. But we'll help you navigate that. They would not qualify for disability insurance because they're not disabled. But they would likely qualify if you laid them off for unemployment assistance, and they are removing a lot of roadblocks with respect to that and increasing the pay. So if you think about someone who's laid off, typically they're only eligible for about $250 a week. Looks like, according to the current bill text, it's going to be closer to $850 a week. In addition, you could give them some severance to help make up the gap for them. That severance is also included under the SBA lending program and forgiveness program as effectively payroll. So I think what you're going to see in most circumstances is a mixture of a few of these different benefits. It could be that they do not qualify for sick leave, but they do qualify for family leave. Many of the kids' schools have been closed, daycare centers have been closed. And so as a result of that, a lot of your employees have kids at home, and as a result of that, they may qualify for the Family Leave Act, and you can pay them and get refundable tax credits for up to 10 weeks.
I will say this, there's some planning to be done around this, and this is where I think ultimately a lot of us have employees that are near and dear to us and important to our business. And one thing we hadn't mentioned is the government is going to send checks to a lot of families. So part of this, it's if they do, if you do have to let them go, they're going to get unemployment. They're going to get checks from the government at least for a couple of months. Looks like $1,200, $1,500, up to $3,000 per family. So that actually goes into the equation. And then, and on top of that, if you do some severance, you can get them exactly where they were from a payroll standpoint for the next 2 or 3 months, and have very little out of your pocket. And if you communicate that effectively to your clients, I think this is your employees, and I think this is the biggest part of this, they need to know that you care. And they need to know you're working hard to try to help them out, because, hey, this thing's going to be over and I need you back here in the boat rowing with me. And so that's what we'll stand to help y'all do, is help maybe do some of those calculations, help navigate some of the legal hurdles here, so that for the employees that y'all want to keep in the long term, you can do the thing that's most economically sensible to you while taking care of that at the same time. And and if we're getting any question, that probably 2/3 of the question have been about employees, and it's 2/3 of the question we've been getting for the last week and a half. So I think that was just important to say.
Well, and I just want to make one last statement relative to that, and that is that, I know it seems hard to believe, to think laying someone off is actually to some degree doing them a favor, but it very well can be, because at the end of the day, these people in many cases have worked for the business for years and years. They're loyal to the business. You've been loyal to them. But if you're not here because you're not financially prudent, it does them no good, and they're going to be out there looking for a job. So you're not laying them off because you don't love them and you don't care about them. You're actually laying them off to protect the business and make sure they have a home to come back to when the crisis clears.
That's a great point, Drew. Okay, we just got informed that the SBA site appears to be down. Is it worth applying with paper forms, or should I wait for the site to be up and apply electronically?
Great question. One of our intrepid employees, Lindsay Faust, has been working with a friend on some of this. Here's when you ought to apply: about 11 o'clock at night. Evidently from about 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. it's been jammed up. But I believe if you try to do that later in the evening, people are finding they're having a lot more luck. And you can definitely go the paper app route. We can help with that, but it's obviously that's probably going to be a lot slower.
Okay, great.
And one thing I want to make the point of too is we're going to be, as part of the resource materials we'll put out, is we're going to be talking to a number of our banking contacts and trying to find, specific contact information that you can reach out to talk with them. Again, we will assist with that. We can facilitate those conversations and have deep, long-standing relationships with a lot of banks who are very familiar with and have been involved with SBA lending.
Okay. Michael Berry, I'm going to give you this. Stephen can assist if interested. Michael, can you speak more about the comment regarding the reason why insurance companies face additional problems, and speak to the depth of known risk to the industry?
Yeah, good question. So there aren't problems. So let me just make sure that we understand there's not a problem. I'm saying that they're under stress. So when you think about an insurance company's general portfolio, anywhere from 70 to 80% of that portfolio is typically comprised of fixed income securities. When you think about that, it's because they have to pay out claims and they have reserve requirements. And if you think about our current fixed income environment for the last decade, it's been anemic. And so it's very difficult for insurance carriers to generate return, and now add some stress in these marketable securities. So the other 20-30% of a portfolio is commercial real estate, stock portfolio, and so those are under stress as well. And so what I was saying by that is whatever the illustrated returns that you think you were going to get that were shown to you 10, 15, 20 years ago are likely not going to happen. So there are some remedies for that. I don't know if that answers the question.
Okay, excellent.
Let me
Another
hop in
question.
here because I just had a text from a client. Because Drew said this, and I've been watching the news a little bit this afternoon. Just want everybody to be aware this whole increase to the amount, if you lay off an employee to $800, that is definitely still in flux. There are 4 Republican senators who have come out and said, if that's in there, we're not voting on this thing because you're going to incentivize a whole lot of people to get fired. So before you go and make a move tonight, just realize that particular piece is in flux. I expect that number to move a little bit before this is all over, because I don't think people did the math there and said, hey, I'm going to be incentivized to fire a whole bunch of my employees. That's not what the government's trying to do here. So more to come.
Okay. Brandon, will businesses classified as vital businesses like food packaging, etc., be exempt from the new Family Medical Leave Act or the EPSLA Acts? Currently 60 employees. Part 2, what about farming operations with more than 25 employees?
Yeah. So first off, with part 2, if you are a business, then and you have more than 25 employees, then that no exemption currently applies. There is a regulatory. The statute authorizes the Department of Labor to issue regulations exempting businesses with 50 or fewer employees. But until those regulations come out, then they don't apply. So you have to assume that it will apply to your business. For the first question, if you're a vital business, if you've been designated a vital business for some reason, then the statute actually says, and it includes specific regulatory authority, that allows the Department of Labor to exempt those businesses and exempt certain categories of businesses and certain categories of employees. So this is an area that we are looking to see that they would do that. One area where they did that statutorily is with healthcare. And so certain healthcare providers and their workers, they are exempt from these rules. But all that will be in the regulations. And at this point, we really don't know who is going to be exempt or what the scope of those exemptions will be.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question for Jesse. How do I know I'm acting appropriately as a business owner regarding my insurance and claims matters? How would I know if I misstepped in terms of your suggested process?
The short answer is get your policy. And I mean, we're reviewing policies now for free and giving our advice as to the steps to take in order to make sure that you're presenting a claim that is specific to your policy as well as your industry. So, and also to be frank with us or whomever you send your policy to review as to what emails, statements that have been made thus far that they need to review that's going to be a part of or that may be pulled in later in assessing whether or not that claim should be paid or was properly denied.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. I have our last question for Jamie Pope. Jamie, I'm heavy involved in commercial real estate. What is my top priority right now?
Great question. First, all property owners would be affected. There may be nowhere to hide here. And rule 1 is always to stop digging. So what I have reviewed from experts is really this. It's like a 7-step process. Number 1 is, regardless of the property type you own, you got to get that building ready to be reopened. You've got to have cleaning procedures in place for now before your tenants arrive, your employees arrive, and then a plan to clean that nightly. Very, very important. All experts are recommending you do that first. Then many of the things you've heard on this call. Review those leases. If you have tenants and you want to modify, some of those are time sensitive, please review the language of your contract. As Jesse just said, get out those insurance policies and review them. Any communications to clients you have to be very sensitive of right now because it could modify some agreements that you have. Many tax refunds and tax credits could be available. The new loss carry forwards or the suspension of the passive activity rules could be huge. That means there could be more cash flow to you to take advantage of to keep your property stable. Stop digging that hole today. Thanks, Cammie.
Absolutely. Let's see, we did get one final question that we will allow. And the question is, if I lay off all my staff, can I hire some of them back part-time hourly to be able to keep my office open? I understand they will have to offset whatever's earned hourly from their unemployment benefits. Brandon.
Yeah, that is possible. You do have to be careful about discrimination and at that point, and so if you're going to do that, then I would definitely consult an expert before taking that action. But yes, it is possible. You would have to offset the benefits, and that would also affect certain credits that you may be entitled to. Be mindful though that under the new act that those part-time employees are still going to be entitled to benefits as well. So if they have to take sick leave or family leave, then, or if they're eligible for that, then you could wind up paying those benefits too. But yes, it is possible to temporarily or lay off your employees and then rehire some of them in a part-time position.
Appreciate that, Brandon. I think Chad had one more quick item to say, and then we're going to wrap up.
Thank you, Stephen. One thing I wanted to make sure that we highlight before we go back to you. We talked a little bit about some of the things that were in the playbook, and I want to make sure that when we do send out the link to everybody and all the participants, that when you look at the microsite, it's going to have a number of different documents, and I can tell you that nobody in the industry has put more time and effort into these than we have, and they are very up to date. And we've got the right kind of professionals against, various industries, whether it be tax attorneys, our firm, CPAs, whatever. And we feel like it's very comprehensive. And it also offers a very unique perspective. We all get documents every day that are analyst type documents that come with just general overview or law firm documents, and I don't mean that ugly towards anybody because we've all worked in those firms, but our firm allows us a chance to be a little bit more nimble and practical. And every time we write something, we think about who is our end user, who is our reader, and who are our constituents. And so we wrote it with all of you in mind. We wrote it with us in mind and our family members in mind. And so we feel like they offer a lot of very strategic pieces of information for decisions that are facing you and everybody else. And so please read them. They're good, and take advantage of them. With that being said, as it relates to many of those opportunities and quote menu items that you see in there, just know that here at Addicus and with the people that are on this phone, whether we're with Addicus or different firms, we have assembled a SWAT team and task force to really address all of these things that are coming up. Our goal is to take care of our clients, and so we view this as a crisis situation, and we are on call 24/7 and here for this, and this is why you do business with us. And so we look forward to being able to help you. And just because of the administrative burden in navigating the SBA world or renegotiating some of your current credit facilities, insurance arrangements, whatever it may be, we know that. We know it's a pain. let us help you with that. And we've got people on call and ready to do that. And we're going to be able to take advantage of some of our, scale efficiencies and be there for you like we always would. And so,
All right.
yeah, we're living a different time, but thank you, Stephen.
All right, thanks, Chad. Again, we will be reaching out to each one of you individually. We'll be sending you information as forward. But more importantly, I know there are many, many of you on this call who we have already spoken to, others that we're going to speak to. We want to spend some one-on-one time really digging into your particular situation, using all these tools and others we've discussed to craft a plan that is flexible, creates the right liquidity, and ultimately we will all come out of the back end of this and thrive. So that's what we're here to do. We appreciate everyone's valuable time. Thank you for so many of you staying on the call. And if you have any follow-ups or any questions, let us know. Everybody have a great evening. Goodbye.